Welcome back to Yu-Gi-Oh! History with Joe Giorlando. In today's video, we are finally going to take a look at the 2010 Edison format. Now, unlike all of the previous videos, instead of dating this format specific to a ban list, I'm actually only going to date it specific to a single SJC Edison, which took place in April 2010. That's because the release of The Shining Darkness in early May completely changed the landscape of the format. The Shining Darkness saw the release of XX Dark Soul, Herald of Perfection, the Infernity cards beyond just Archfiend. I'm talking about ones like Launcher and Infernity Necromancer and Beetle. And then in addition to that, Ronin Totem, which contributed not only to Frog FTK, but also a much more powered version of Frog Monarchs. As a result of the releases in The Shining Darkness, what we saw in Edison, New Jersey is nothing like what we would see going forward. As a matter of fact, this one event in April of 2010 is often cited as one of the most enjoyable, skill-intensive, but diverse single events in all of Yu-Gi-Oh's history. Not quite to the level of GOAT format, Edison also has a pretty reasonable modern-day crowd, often playing the format, revisiting the format, building decks which may not have actually been played back in 2010, but over the course of the last decade have been developed using more modern Yu-Gi-Oh! Understandings. As I commented on a few weeks ago, really at this point a few months ago, I had James Ark from Ed, Eddie, and Edison, their YouTube channel devoted to Edison format, come on and talk about Frog FTK, which wasn't playable during Edison. But in that video, we talked about how he, along with some of his close friends, have focused on Edison format as a retro format in which they devote a lot of time. So in this case, this is one of the most enjoyable old school formats that we're going to talk about, one that doesn't quite have the following of GOAT format, but still has a pretty reasonable following out there. So if you enjoy the deck profile that we're going to talk about today, or any of the Edison deck profiles, there is absolutely a community out there to play with. Anyway, we're going to take a look at the first place deck from SJC Edison, none other than Jeff Jones' Quickdraw Dandy Warrior deck, a deck that back in the day I just simply called Quickdraw Plant. This is a deck that's going to utilize Lone Fire Blossom, Dandelion, and Titanial. Again, these are the only plants out at the time. We do not yet have Spore, and we absolutely do not have Glow Up Bulb. So this is nothing like the Tengu plant decks that we would see later on down the line. This is a much different deck that's going to focus on combining the power of Dandelion with Quickdraw, and then obviously Lone Fire Blossom synergies. This deck is going to have a lot of incremental card advantage engines. We're talking about Super Limber Mega Hamster combined with Raikou, Lightsworn Hunter. I'm talking about Caius, the Shadow Monarch, Light and Darkness Dragon, a deck that has a lot of power 1-ofs, maybe a power 2-of here or there, with card advantage engines like Pot of Avarice, utilizing the mill aspect, and then obviously the Drill Warrior, Quickdraw, Dandelion interaction, which I think is a little bit overrated in the sense of how people think about the format. It absolutely happens when you have Quickdraw and Dandy and you have the Drill Warrior loop going on where you're recurring Dandelion every turn to build up a field, building up tokens to use with Titanial, use with tribute monsters down the line. But it didn't happen quite as often as you might think. That was obviously sort of the prototypical best case scenario. But a lot of times you're using Quickdraw, in other cases even using it as a monster to tribute for a Kai's, using it to make things other than Drill Warrior. But nevertheless, we're going to take a deep dive look at Jeff Jones' first place deck from SJC Edison. Before I get into the actual deck profile, I personally view this format very fondly, and specifically this event. One of my close friends, Paul Clark, ended up top 32ing with this said deck, Quickdraw Dandy Warrior. And then myself, I played this deck at the event. I didn't do very well, and I got to play side events. I used this deck in the side events, and I met a friend who would become a relatively close friend as time progressed, Robert Boyage, and he and I played an untimed Quickdraw Dandelion mirror match in the side events, right? The side events are a little bit more casual. You go off and play your opponent. There's no, sometimes, at least back in 2010, set in stone period of time. This happened to be one of those formats where matches could go way beyond 40 minutes, way beyond even 50 minutes. We played basically an hour-plus grind Quickdraw Dandelion mirror match. It was really enjoyable. At the end of the match, he ended up winning, but we reflected on it, talked about all our plays. It's really one of those formats where you can delve deep into massive amount of plays just because the games could take so long and there'd be so much back and forth. And he'd end up becoming a good friend of mine who, over the course of the next few years, would end up winning an SJC or at least a YCS and be someone who I constantly got in touch with when we saw each other at events. So I view this event very fondly. Some of my closest friends did really well. I met people who would end up becoming really close friends. And although I didn't do very well at the event specifically, it was one of the most enjoyable events in my entire career. But without further ado, let's take a look at Jeff Jones' first place Quickdraw Plant deck from SJC Edison 2010. All right, we'll start the deck with the namesake of Quickdraw Synchron. We have 2 copies of Quickdraw Synchron. And of course, in combination with that, we have the 2 copies of Dandelion. So when people think of this deck, they think of obviously the name that Konami often used, Quickdraw Dandy Warrior. If you actually were to go back and play this format and with this exact deck list, yes, this obviously happens, but this is sort of that best case scenario universe. Oftentimes, you're using Dandelion instead just with something like Lonefire Blossom in order to generate a bunch of tokens and use those tokens to negate things with Titanial, or keep those tokens around and tribute them for a bunch of power cards like Light and Darkness Dragon or Caius the Shadow Monarch. I know this deck, when you think about it, obviously has that Quickdraw Dandy package, but a lot of times this is just a grindy card advantage generation machine, and it gives you, the pilot of the deck, a lot of flexibility about how to navigate the game. Is this one of the games where you're going to focus on Light and Darkness Dragon, Titanial? Maybe you do want to go for the Drill Warrior stuff, so a lot of options there. In order to support these cards, I kind of put this at the top because I find these to be the cards that you're really trying to support. To support them, I guess I'll actually put Debris Dragon. Debris Dragon, I think, sort of falls in line with these cards. So Debris Dragon, obviously, it allows you to bring back things like Dandelion, also things like Card Trooper, Lonefire Blossom, usually going into Black Rose Dragon, but this deck has a bunch of dragons in the extra deck because of the Debris Dragon, so we're also going to be going into things like Stardust all the time. We'll be running multiple Stardust because of that, so this is sort of the top line, the cards that I think really win you the game. In order to get there, we have triple Raikou and 2 copies of Super Nimble Mega Hamster. So if you're not familiar with these, so Raikou is pretty generic, right? Mill 3, pop a card, that's obviously fantastic in a deck with Dandelion, a deck with triple Pot of Avarice, that's fantastic. It's one of those cards that allows you to, let's say, protect the Raikou with something like Deep Prison, then flip it, destroy a back row, tribute for Caius, destroy another back row. Maybe you have another monster, a Dandy token, and now you're popping something and tributing for Light and Darkness Dragon. There's just a ton of ability there, a ton of flexibility. And then what Super Nimble Mega Hamster does is it basically just searches when it flips a set Raikou. So if your opponent attacks this, theoretically it dies. You just search your deck for a Raikou and set it. Now you have the ability to flip, pop something, tribute for Caius, tribute for something else, etc. The only liability with Super Nimble Mega Hamster was in the Flameville Monarch matchup. That deck has Fire Flameville Dog, or Flameville Fire Dog, which is a 1900 that when it destroys a monster by battle, you search out a 1400 tuner. It's basically a vanilla monster, but a 1400 tuner. The liability there is if you attack over the Raikou and you search, or you attack over the Mega Hamster and you search Raikou, they're going to search a tuner and go to Stardust Dragon, and now your Raikou is going to get outed by the Stardust Dragon. But assuming you play it safely, you're not setting Mega Hamster without any protection whatsoever, and you know you're playing against Flamevilles, it's really not that bad. The ability to generate that card advantage, or at least tutor out a Raikou, is just fantastic. So makes it so that this deck can really brick wall, right? You set that against a Blackwing deck, and they need to collude over it unless they go into their extra deck or normal summon Sirocco. I'm talking about sort of the situation where they just have Shuro. And then we have a Card Trooper, which is great. Mills 3, go to Dandelion, Fuels Card Trooper. It's a card we can get off Debris. You can actually Trooper off of a Debris. Yes, Debris Dragon negates effects, but the mill is a cost, so you can still do that to put cards into the graveyard, which often you want to do. Saying in which searches basically every power card in the deck, from Quickdraw to Lonefire to Debris. Night Assailant, which combos really well with Drill Warrior. When you discard this, you can bring back a flip effect monster. This deck has obviously Raikou, Mega Hamster, and then it also has a Morphing Jar. So it has 6 different cards that it could return back and allow you to generate a little bit of additional card advantage when you're doing your Quickdraw / Drill Warrior stuff. So here is our monster lineup, a lot of sort of support cards to just bring us to the top line here where we're going to be winning the game and pushing through damage. Well, how are we going to get there in terms of spells and traps? We're going to play a lot of one-ofs. That's really the name of the Edison format, just one-for-ones back and forth. So we have first 3 Pot of Avarice. This is the game-breaking card in this deck, in my opinion, because when you have Raikous and Card Troopers and a bunch of monsters like Lonefire Blossom, you're fueling your graveyard all of the time. The game does go long enough for you to play 2 or 3 copies. The monsters that you're putting back are fantastic. You really want to find a way to generate card advantage in this format because a lot of the format is a back-and-forth one-for-one grind. And Pot of Avarice is just that perfect card that puts back the Lonefire engine, draws you obviously 2 cards, but allows you to +1 in that situation. So we want to get to 1 or 2 every game. We're going to maximize the full 3. We're going to run 2 copies of Book of Moon. We have a reasonable amount of flip effects. It's also a card that stops Black Whirlwind when you activate it in response to a normal summoned Blackwing. You can activate this on Quickdraw, your opponent's Quickdraw specifically, and maybe they invested a card in hand, and now you flip down their Quickdraw and you can attack over it before they go into Drill Warrior. It's one of the only real ways of preemptively outing Drill Warrior. So Book of Moon, really fantastic. And then just some generic sort of obvious inclusions. We have Heavy Storm, Mystical Space Typhoon, Brain Control, which was legal at this point, and then a Foolish Burial. So what Foolish Burial does is it allows you to basically send Dandelion, and then you have a couple different plays from that point. You can go Summon Debris, get back Dandy, and then you have a 2 level 1s, and then obviously Debris Dragon. From that point, you can go into Black Rose, and then get 2 tokens in the aftermath, or you can go into Stardust, or Red Dragon Archfiend, or even technically Iron Chain Dragon with the 2 tokens plus the Debris Dragon. So you have a variety of options in that point. Later on, not at this point in time, you could go into Trishula, but that's not the case now, right? Trishula is not out yet. So you might have heard what I just said and thought, oh, that's perfectly for Trish. Yeah, that's Tengu plan format, not Quickdraw plans. You can also send the Dandy token, summon Lone Fire Blossom, and then you can tribute off a Dandy token, get another Lone Fire Blossom, use that Lone Fire Blossom's effect, and end on Lone Fire, Titanial, which is good because if your opponent can't deal with both Lone Fires, then the Lone Fire that remains on the board goes into Dandy the next turn, and now you have 3 negates with that Titanial, right? Because you can tribute off the Dandelion that's on the field, that brings 2 tokens, tribute those off, so it gives you a ton of Titanial negations. So that's why we're playing Foolish Burial. And then a bunch of traps, right? We have double bottomless trap hole, which is just an obviously strong card. And if we're going to 1-for-1 back and forth, people are going to play everything from Light Sworns to Black Wings to this deck. I mean, you're going to be using this all the time, whether it's on a Flamebell Fire Dog or Judgment Dragon. So obviously a great inclusion. Shura, all the Black Wings. Double Dust Tornado in a grindy back and forth format. We obviously want cards like this. It's just one of the best cards in this format because when people are running Caius and Raikou, you can set this. You pretty reliably know you're not going to get just OTK'd. You kind of want your opponent to play into you. So your opponent flips Raikou, you chain Dust Tornado, pop their back row. Now they're kind of in an awkward position, or maybe they just tribute someone for Caius, you chain Dust Tornado. You make it so that whatever it is that they're using their removal on is just a chainable. So just fantastic in that regard. Hits Black Whirlwind, which is a big deal. That deck is a tough deck to play against, so hitting Black Whirlwind is obviously fantastic. Black Whirlwind's one of the really clear, if you don't stop it cards, you're going to lose, particularly in this format, because if they get 3 or 4 cards out of it, well, they just double Pot of Avarice to you, and you're working so hard to fuel your graveyard, they're just getting it for free. So you want to kill those as fast as possible. Deep Prison, again, kind of goes along the lines with Bottomless, really good. Grindy card. Call of the Haunted combos really well in this deck, a little bit more than other decks. Call of the Haunted's far from a staple. This isn't 2007, 2006, where basically everybody runs Call. Call of the Haunted makes a lot of sense in this deck, though, because you can bring back Titanial, you can bring back Dandy, you can chain it off a Sangan, off a Heavy Storm or an MST or a Dust Tornado, Raikou, Caius, all of those, and get back Dandelion, Sangan, and Card Trooper. So there's a variety of cards that you could use to bring back. That happens all the time, right? If you played Yu-Gi-Oh, you know. They play MST, they play Heavy, they flip Raikou, target call, you chain it, Card Trooper, draw a card. Your deck actually has a lot of different cards to search or to bring back and get some card advantage there. And then some generic mass removal. Basically every normal type of deck at this point is going to be running these. And then we have a Starlight Road and a Solemn Judgment. The Road actually just came out. This was a brand new release in and around this event. So there was a lot of skepticism about how good this card was. I was always a fan of it from the moment it was released, really up until maybe 2013 when it sort of fell off and Yu-Gi-Oh really shifted. But while it was legal for those few years after it was printed, I really loved Starlight Road. A lot of good cards you could hit. Obviously, Mirror Force, Torrential, Heavy Storm, Black Rose Dragon. Black Rose was everywhere in the mirror match. So having a card like that in your deck made it really awkward for your opponent. And this was before the release of Solemn Warning. So the only way to really out that was Solemn Judgment. And then there's some tricky ways you can out it. Sort of. Not even really great ways. Like if you play Heavy Storm and you chain MST on your Heavy Storm when they chain Road, because the Road's not negating and destroying the Storm, they don't get the Stardust, but it still negates the Heavy, so it's not like you're really getting ahead there. But there were some ways to make it so that your opponent at least didn't get the Stardust on the board, but even then, didn't feel good whenever you had to do that. All right, so for the extra deck, we need at least 2 copies of Stardust Dragon. There's some debate here. This deck has a really limited accessibility with the extra deck because the only tuners in the deck are Quickdraw, which limits you to Synchron-based Synchro monsters, and then Debris, which limits you to Dragons. So you don't have the ability just to run a bunch of everything. So it makes a lot of sense to just run the maximum amount of the things that you can actually go into. Stardust Dragon, Jeff ran 3 copies. I could totally see that being the right number, but I have 2 copies here. I know Jerry Wang, I think, ran only 2 copies, so there's some discussion points there. At least 1 copy of Red Dragon Archfiend. To me, I'd actually almost rather run 2-2 than 3-1. But 1 copy of Red Dragon Archfiend, that was standard. 1 copy of Black Rose Dragon, that's all you could run. You would absolutely play more than 1 if you had the ability to do so, but you have triple avarice for a reason. Putting back Black Rose Dragon obviously allows you to summon it multiple times. Ancient Fairy Dragon just gives us basically another level 7 dragon, which matters. Level 7 specifically matters because if you don't have anything on the board, debris plus, whether it's Dandy, Card Trooper, or something else, Lone Fire Blossom, you want to have the ability to go into a level 7. Then we have Iron Chain Dragon, which isn't a great card, but it's a dragon, so we actually need to include it. You can make it with Raikou or 2 Dandelion tokens. You might even convince me that you want to play more than that, more than just a single copy. And then we need a bunch of Synchron monsters. So 2 copies of Drill Warrior. In the perfect world, you're discarding Dandy, bringing it back, building up a impenetrable field of Dandelion tokens and dealing 12 every turn until you kill your opponent. Doesn't necessarily always happen like that, but that's sort of the perfect world scenario. So a couple copies of Drill Warrior. And then some utility ones. Again, this deck doesn't have any natural tuners in it anywhere other than brain controlling your opponent's tuner. So we can do things like run Junk Archer, which we can actually make with Synchron, which is sort of a pseudo Doomlord effect. We have Turbo Warrior, which when you battle a level 6 or higher monster, it halves the opponent's Synchro monster, it halves their attack. And then this card cannot be targeted by effects of level 6 or lower monsters, kind of this weird effect where it attacks really well into level 6s, Synchros, and then stops your opponent from targeting it with level 6 or lower, which doesn't honestly really come up all that much, but nevertheless, we want it there. We want some flexibility. It has technically a little bit more attack than Drill Warrior, so let's say you can only go into a level 6, which is really unlikely actually, but let's just say for the sake of discussion, you can only go into a level 6 and they're at 25 life, not 24. Well, there you go. And then Nitro Warrior is a cool one. You want a lot of random games with Nitro Warrior. Basically, its attack boosts when you activate a spell, and then when it destroys something by battle, it allows you to basically shift another monster that's in face-up defense into attack and then attack it again. So that's a kind of cool effect that can win the game out of nowhere. Really a convoluted, really long effect, but it came up every now and then. And then because we have brain control, we do want some generic targets. We have sort of the best ones, Catastor, Goyo, and Bryanak. And then Chimera Tech is the final one. We are absolutely going to put it in our extra deck because we're going to side deck Cyber Dragon. Gadget decks are really good. Jeff Jones actually played one in the finals of the event, so we absolutely want to include that. We don't want to waste side deck spots, particularly when the extra deck, because of the limitations with dragons and because of the limitations with Synchrons, has a lot of flexibility. In terms of the decks that one could play at that point in time, there's kind of a lot here. We have Black Wings, which was to me a really scary deck. I lost to Black Wings round 1 of the event as I went 0-2 drop. I played actually this deck, Quickdraw. I went 0-2, I played against Black Wings, and then I lost against a macro deck. I didn't draw any removal for his macro. The other top deck to me, or one of the other top decks, was Frog Monarchs. My good friend Devin Schwartz almost topped. He lost on the bubble with this deck. Did have Substitute, did not have Ronin Tonin, though. That card, when it came out, facilitated the FTK. We're not at the point of the FTK deck. Another awesome deck at the time was Flamebell Monarchs. It doesn't seem like that cool of a deck, but Flamebell Firedog did a really good job beating up on Mega Hamsters, allowing you to search Flamebell Magician, which is an effect monster, but it basically is a vanilla tuner. It gains attack points if you have Ally of Justice Catastor on the field. Essentially is what it does. Turns into an 18 instead of a 14. But it's a tuner, and when this destroys a monster by battle, you can search this out, and then this is a non-tuner and a tuner, basically an immediate level 8, which is really good. Rekindling is probably the most powerful singular card in the format when it works, because one card can special summon as many low defense fire monsters as possible. So if it's really late into the game, you can bring back 2 Magicians, 2 Fire Dogs, and now one card was 2 level 8s or just a bunch of monsters. Obviously, Rekindling, ridiculously powerful. We had a FTK deck that there's not really much you can do about it, but there was an FTK deck with dragons. There's obviously the Mirror Match. Caliber Cat, this is a deck that Billy really enjoyed. It didn't really do that great, but in modern tournaments for Edison format, there's a Diva deck that's actually done fairly well, so that's pretty cool. Destiny Drop was limited to 1 of all things, can you believe that? But there was a cool Destiny Hero deck with water monsters allowing you to go into absolute 0. It's actually a really fun deck that I played at a regional during this format and had a blast with. Modern tournaments with Edison, this deck is actually something to consider. I don't think it was very good, but X-Sabers had come out. The problem, though, is that Dark Soul was not out, and Dark Soul is really the card that put X-Sabers over the top, so it was a really grindy deck that, I don't know, it wasn't all that great. It was pretty underwhelming to me, but it was there. A lot of them focused on the hand loop with like Fultrol and Rajagura and Gonems, but I don't think it was great. You could have run or played against Gladiator Beasts. They were obviously still there. Lightsworns was still a deck. Dan Larmatina, good friend of mine, played Lightsworns and topped that event. So Descendant had come out, Recruiter had not yet come out, so there was a Gravekeeper deck that people tried. There was a Gravekeeper burn deck that actually did top, so I will comment on that. I think Gravekeepers was about a year or so off of being really good when they got Recruiter, but Descendant was pretty good. Descendant was so good that people played the Spy Engine with Descendant in decks like Synchro Cat and like Flameville deck, Flameville Monarchs, just because that interaction was so good. The 2000 defense off Spy is really good, and then you get a Descendant out, pop something. And then there's Gadgets, which is actually what Jeff played in the finals. So how did Jeff counteract? So I just have Jeff's side deck. He has a few cards I think are a little bit weird, and I bet if you were to ask him, he would have changed a couple things, which is odd winning the event. But if I asked him, optimize to make it even better than winning, what would you have done? But let's just see what he had. A couple DD Crows, unreal in the mirror match. You want to hit their DD, you want to hit their Pot of Avarice, you want to hit their Call of Haunted, a lot of those things. So fantastic in the mirror match, has utility and other things too. Consecrated Lights, these are for Black Wings, obviously fantastic against Black Wings, has some utility against a couple of the other matchups here or there, but mostly for Black Wings, right? It's really that straight to the point we're going to counteract Black Wings. Some System Downs, fantastic against, obviously, the Gadget deck that he played in the final, so has a clear spot there. My Body is a Shield. This card's really good against Icarus attack. It's really good against Judgment Dragon, Geyseris. It's one of those cards that's really powerful. It stops, obviously, Black Rose Dragon, too, so it has some utility even in the mirror match, so I really like My Body is a Shield. And then you can just use it to stop Torrential, Bottomless, things like that. 2 copies of Shallow Flip. This obviously has some utility. It's good against Judgment Dragon, good against Geyseris. It kind of has some of that same utility there. This is before Solemn Warnings printing, so having a counter trap that stops Geyseris, as opposed to Bottomless, where you might still lose a card, is obviously really good. This is one of the cards that, I don't know if Jeff played against X-Sabers, but this is an incredibly narrow card. Something like System Down is okay to me, because I think Machina Gadgets was a deck that you really had some worry about. I don't even think X-Sabers are that good. And to the extent that Gothams is actually good against them is a little bit debatable. The fact that this is here, though, is another one of the reasons why you could have sort of these generic synchros in your extra deck. What this basically does is if there's an X-Saber on the field, either side of the field, you can special summon 2 X-Sabers from your opponent's graveyard. The best way of doing this is to save it for your opponent's Gotham's Call and make it so that they use Gotham's Call, assuming it's just going to resolve, because why wouldn't it? And then you chain this because they control an X-Saber and take what they would have got, or take one of the things that they would have gotten something else. And now all of a sudden you have the X-Sabers on your side of the field. And obviously you don't want to take things like Emmer's Blade, but I mean, you could take Full Hell Knight, you could take some of the X-Sabers, a Pashul, Rajagura maybe, just take whatever they have. And if you take something that happens to be a tuner, it is useful to then be able to just synchro, right? Let's say you did this on your turn and you took their Emmer's Blade and a Full Hell Knight. Well, now you can just go to Bryanak or Goyo and you don't have to worry about leaving an Emmer's Blade on your board. So there is some utility there. I don't think X-Sabers are that good at this point without Dark Soul. So I think there's some debate about including these, but that's why they were there. You might seem like, what the heck are they there for? That was the reason. A couple of copies of Pulling the Rug. Combine those with DD Crow, so now we have a reasonable package against the Truebone Frog Monarch deck, which I thought was really good. And then a copy of Trap Hole, which for the life of me, I can't give you the specific reason that Jeff included it. If I had to guess, it was probably just be another reasonable card against Black Wings. Having cards that stop your opponent from searching off Whirlwind are really good. And it's also relatively good against Gladiator Beast as well. So, nevertheless, this is a look at Jeff Jones' exact first place deck from the Shonen Jump Championship in Edison, New Jersey. It is, unfortunately, a deck that only really had that single event. Once Infernities and X-Sabers really hit their peak in the summer, as you probably well know, this deck was pushed to the side. Other decks like Frog, FTK, and Herald came out as well, so a short-lived but really fun deck. Before I sign off, I just want to comment again. If you haven't already done, go check out James Ark's Edison channel. I commented on this when I interviewed him about Frog FTK about a month and a half ago at this point. His channel is all about Edison, so if you haven't already done so, please check the description. I'll give you a link over to his channel so you can watch a bunch of videos all about this event, because it's not quite as popular as GOAT format, but it's easily one of the most popular formats to go back and play. But nevertheless, it's Joe Giorlando for Yu-Gi-Oh! History. Thank you for watching. Check back soon for plenty more Yu-Gi-Oh! content.